So if you've watched any of my videos before, you'll know that my preferred travel setup is this camera right here, my Leica M10. I often pair this camera with either a 35, a 50 or a 90mm lens, and it's really been my go-to travel setup for a couple of years. So why, on my recent trip to Hawaii, did I decide to take a completely different camera setup with me? So when I was planning for my trip to Hawaii, I knew that the gear I was taking had to check off a couple of essential items. The first one being is that my camera had to be weather sealed, and while I'm not afraid to take my M10 out in light rain, sand, dust, snow, etc., it does come to a point where the rain and conditions would be detrimental to the camera and I'd risk breaking the camera, and I certainly don't want to do that. And in Hawaii, I knew I was going to be spending a lot of time outdoors in windy, salt spray, rain, mud, and other kind of tropical conditions. So in this instance, I elected to take the camera I'm using to film this video, which is my Leica SL2-S. Now, the camera choice wasn't that difficult, but deciding what lens to take was a little bit more challenging. But after 2 weeks in Hawaii, I think I ended up making the right decision. So the lens I elected to use was the new Lumix 40mm f2, which just got released in late June. And I was lucky to be able to pick up a copy of this before I went away on the trip. I want to be really transparent here and clear that Lumix did not give me this lens. They did not ask to give any input in this review, and they're not involved in it at all. I spent my own money on the product, and everything you're going to hear today is going to be completely honest and unbiased. So at this point, I think it's really important to talk about the problem I was trying to solve when I arrived at taking this particular lens with me. So typically I'd pair this particular camera with my Leica 24-70. And while that is a fantastic lens that has completely fantastic weather sealing, the build quality is there and the image quality is great, one of the drawbacks is it's very heavy, and the SL2S body is already pretty beefy to begin with. And it just makes this camera kind of cumbersome, especially if you're going to be walking around all day. The other thing I needed to make sure that the lens was discreet. Nothing draws more attention to you as a photographer when you start using larger zooms on larger camera bodies. And while putting the 40mm on the SL2S is not as discreet as, say, M10 with a 35, it's definitely less noticeable than if I was to be using that 24-70. And I wanted to do this because there might be some opportunity for some street photography, and I know that I'm more confident if I'm less noticeable when I'm photographing. And finally, obviously, I've already talked about this, I wanted weather sealing. The conditions in Hawaii can be pretty adverse. I knew I was going to be going on boat trips, going to be at beaches, going to be hiking probably in rain and maybe potentially heavy rain. I didn't want to have to worry about babying the camera. And again, while I'm not afraid to get the M10 dirty, it just does not have weather sealing that I would sufficiently feel comfortable in taking out in prolonged rain or really heavy sandy and dusty environments. The SL2S I know is reliable in these particular environments because I've used it in them before. It's never let me down, so it was the obvious choice for this particular trip. Now, I think it's also really important to point out here that the SL2S and the 40 were not my only cameras on this particular trip. I did take along with me my Leica M6, a 35 and a 90 in case I wanted more reach, because I also wanted to shoot a little film, and I could also use those lenses adapted on the other camera body. But ultimately, by the end of the trip, what I realized is that this 40mm lens from Lumix stayed on my camera probably 90% of the time, and rarely did I switch it out for anything else. The combination of the 40 and the SL2S body really turned out to be a great everyday carry. It was light, and I easily could throw it over my shoulder and basically spend all day with it and not notice it. So at this point, let's talk about a couple of things I really liked about the 40 from Lumix. So it certainly checked off the compact profile and lightweight aspects that I was looking for. It really was very, very unnoticeable. It gave the camera a very low profile look, and I'd have the camera around my neck all day and not really notice it. Once the camera came out in the morning, it really didn't go back in the bag. It made the camera very, very easy to carry around all day. The second thing that I know a lot of people who use autofocus cameras are concerned about, and especially if you're using the SL2-S, which doesn't always have the greatest reputation for snappy autofocus, is in fact the lens's autofocus capabilities. Now, I've never experienced any problems with autofocus on this particular camera, and the same applied when using it with this particular lens. Autofocus was snappy, it locked on. If I was using tracking, it didn't break. I really didn't have any experience or experience any problems with the autofocus. And if I did, I think really it was more down to my user area than the actual camera itself. And finally, we'll talk about the fact that it certainly was discreet. Very, very compact, low profile, and it made the camera very unnoticeable, opposed to me using the 24-70, which is definitely a noticeable combination. Now, I will say that occasionally 40mm may be a little bit tight for some people, but I was able to manage to work around that. And it actually created the opportunity to really use the lens in different, more creative ways. I made a lot of stitch panoramas using the 40, and I'll throw a couple of those up on the screen so you can see them. And I'm pretty happy with the results. Now, none of the products that we use as photographers are 100% perfect for everybody. And so I think it's important to talk about some of the drawbacks that I encountered while using this lens. And most of these are minor, but I do think that they affected my user experience. The first one is the build quality. Now, there's nothing wrong with the build quality, but if you're coming from the experience of using Leica glass and you're used to that heavy, premium, all-metal feel, that is not what you're gonna get with the Lumix 40mm f2. It's a plastic lens, it feels plastically, the build quality is good, but it just doesn't have that premium feel that you would be associating with Leica products. And quite frankly, I don't think Lumix were aiming to make a lens like that. I think the other thing that will be noticeable if you're coming from Leica glass is the image quality here. Now, there is nothing wrong with the image quality from this particular lens. It's perfectly adequate. Images are tack sharp. What they lack is just that little bit of character that you often associate with Leica glass. And it's really hard to put your finger on it, but if you spent any time shooting with Leica lenses on Leica bodies, there is a slight noticeable difference in some of the image characteristics that you get. And it's certainly the case. I do notice that the images I got just don't look quite as punchy or as bright as some of the images I probably would have taken if I was using my Leica 24-70. Now, the final thing I'll talk about when it comes to drawbacks is really the only item that frustrated me about this particular lens. I'm one of those photographers that likes to use lens hoods to protect the physical characteristics of the lens. I can be kind of clumsy, I do drop cameras occasionally, and on more than one occasion, a lens hood has saved the front element of a lens I've been using. In this instance, Lumix do not provide one with the lens, nor is there one available. So you're stuck, if you want to, buying one from a third party. And to top it off, you have to use a screw-in lens hood, and I really do not like those either. Now, Lumix does say that the coatings and the design of the lens elements prevent the vast majority of lens flaring. And I'll be honest, I pointed this camera at the sun and at angles that would make other lenses certainly flare, and this one did not. I'll throw some of those images up on the screen right now. So their promise is true there, but I wish there was a way that they could go back and look at the design of this lens and think about adding a bayonet mount so that for those of us who like to use hoods, we could put one on this camera and not rely in just having to use a third-party screw-in option. Now, before we get to the final closing comments and my final thoughts about this particular lens, I want to take a moment to thank all of you who are watching today. I know you could choose to watch a myriad of photography videos, so I appreciate you taking the time to click on mine and watch it to this point. If you haven't done so already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It greatly helps the channel. And if you have already done so and are a return watcher, thank you so much for being part of the community. I really, really appreciate you. So to bring it all back to where I started, I think it's important to state or answer the question, did this lens solve the problems I was looking to deal with when I went on this trip? And I think overall the answer is yes, it did. It's weather sealed, it had reliable and snappy autofocus, the image quality is very good and high, just slightly different from what I was looking for. And overall, I'm very, very happy with how the lens performed. I think it's a really, really good option for those of you who are looking for something that might be on a slightly lower budget than typically the lenses that you end up getting from Lumix and especially Leica, but still want to have something that's light, compact, and reliably produces quality images. And I said, overall, I'm very, very pleased with what I got out of the Lumix. And I certainly put it through its paces. It got doused in a couple of heavy thunderstorms. I got sand all over the camera a couple of times. I got salt spray over the camera. And never once did I have any problems with either the camera or the lens. They were both very, very reliable. So I'm glad ultimately that I left my M10 at home and went with this combination.